Well, welcome back. We're back, Arthur. Back from all the flight delays and that kept us off the air last week. Anyway, welcome everyone to Macro Micro Moment. As you know, Arthur and I have great affection for each other. So I bought him a new book called The Basic Laws of Human Stupidity. And there's no agenda. Like, I'm not trying to send a message. We're not married. So it's just a book for him to edify himself.
No, there's always messages being received when you give me books like that, Nancy.
Always and inevitably, everyone underestimates the number of stupid individuals in circulation. All right, so we're going to start today. I'm going to interview Arthur's my guest, and I'm going to interview him on tariffs. Arthur, I noted that about a little over 300 companies in the S&P 500 have reported, and the number of mentions of tariffs on the earnings calls are vastly ahead of the peak in Trump 1.0. So it's like 220 different companies mentioning tariffs. So it's top of mind, and yet this morning we got an announcement of new tariffs from the president. And not only did stocks go up, but bonds went up and yields went down. So tell me what you're thinking in terms of just the big picture of tariffs. And then I have some other specific questions for you.
Yeah, I think part of it is, at least in my opinion, is that it's not just about the specifics of tariffs, it's the threat of tariffs and changing behavior. This president has been a huge proponent of call it re-onshoring, bringing businesses back, bringing manufacturing back to the U.S. You had the CHIPS Act that was prior president really encouraging chip development, getting it back from places like Taiwan or other places that were kind of more unfriendly to the U.S., especially as with AI, the dominance of AI, how important that's become. Not that it wasn't important before, but it's become even more important. But just the threat of future tariffs is going to start making companies that believe they're in the crosshairs or could be in the crosshairs of punitive tariff or tit for tat tariff to start thinking like we probably maybe should open up a location, U.S. manufacturing, so we can avoid that tariff, so we don't suffer the sales impact. Right? It actually reminds me, going back to the '80s, you had Lee Iacocca, and unfortunately, it was the U.S. tariffs on on foreign imported goods, cars and steel and stuff that made our steel and car industry so vulnerable when the tariffs came down. And we all remember what happened. Japanese car companies, all these foreign car companies flooded the U.S. market. The U.S. car companies couldn't compete because they had misallocated resources for so long. They weren't competitive like they should have been, and they just got mauled. Now look at the U.S. I mean, I'm in Nashville. We've got Nissan here. We've got down in Alabama, huge Mercedes plants. They got Toyota plants everywhere. I mean, there's tons of foreign manufacturers of autos in the U.S., as well as other companies that manufacture here in the U.S. And that really is one of the, I'd say, more positive side effects of threats of tariffs or imposing them and then removing them as people try to get around them and plan their businesses so they can continue to sell.
Okay, so that's interesting. I heard Kevin Hassert say today that we tax German cars, European cars, 2.5% when they come over. And when we try to sell ours there, it's 30+%.
Yeah.
And so really, I think that you're right. It also that the president is shining a light, or his administration is shining a light on the inequitable trade that we've experienced for decades. And most Americans don't know it. I mean, I didn't think about it. And it's not just tariffs, it's the VAT tax in Europe that gets slapped onto anything that we sell over there, and non-tariff taxes. So it's interesting. I think it's going to be a wild ride. So in 2017, when the president was first started talking in Trump 1.0, when he started talking about tariffs. What I've heard a lot of people say is that it was non-inflationary. I've actually said it on the air too, that those tariffs did not result in inflation, but we were also in a quantitative easing mode then. And now we're in quantitative tightening, and our head of fixed income Byron Anderson brought this to my attention. Do you think that matters? Do you think it will change whether or not these tariffs are inflationary, if in fact they get put in place?
I mean, the quantitative easing or the quantitative. I mean, I think with all these things, there are pieces of the pie. It depends on how broad the tariff is, how high it is. The first thing in macroeconomics is, businesses and consumers are going to try to, if the price goes up a lot, the first thing they do is they try to find if they can substitute or consume less of that good, right? So they're going to start trying to make changes to their decision making process. Can they make the product with less steel, aluminum, or whatever it is? Can they make it without steel, aluminum? Or if they can't, how much of the price do they have to pass on? How do they find, lower price suppliers? So your system starts trying to recorrect. And that happens at the manufacturer side, the people that are using the inputs, as well as the consumer side. And yeah, these things can be highly inflationary depending on what happens and how long the effects last.
That is such a great point. We've been listening to earnings calls, for the past 3 weeks, and what we're hearing from a lot of the manufacturing companies and other companies, the retailers, is that they made adjustments to their supply chains during Trump 1.0 and then COVID as well. But also, you raised the right point, which is how innovation can solve this. I was reading the earnings report for Tesla, and they bought a lithium mine. And when I visited the factory, they said somebody asked if they were going to, get into the lithium business, and they said no. Elon says there's plenty of lithium. We don't need it. And if we don't have enough lithium, we'll just figure out other ways to make batteries. But now they've actually purchased one. It's not meaningful in terms of the total, but it is interesting how innovative and nimble our manufacturing.
I mean, if you look at fuel, I think
technology.
we've seen that, Nancy. We've seen a lot more of the impact of, let's say, just prices rising. You look at oil prices when they were up like around $200 a barrel, right?
Yeah,
And you see tons of innovation. You see tons of efficiency changes. So
right.
price clearly has a huge impact on it. The risk of starting a high tariff war, effectively, with other trading blocks, is that the consequence of keeping tariffs too high on say domestic competitors is that you can make those industries weak. Like they don't have to allocate resources in a very efficient manner. Why? Because they're protected by the tariffs.
Right.
That's
And
just
we
like,
saw that with steel stocks today, all up today on this news of the steel and aluminum, as the Brits like to say, tariffs. All right. Well, so what's your biggest fear? Are you worried that he's gonna just go nuts with these, or that, there is nothing to fear?
well, unfortunately, it's becomes self-reinforcing. He threatened the tariffs against Mexico and China. Sorry, Mexico and Canada, if they didn't help us, keep our borders more secure, which is ultimately in their best interest too. You think they would have done that? That would have been a no-brainer. He shouldn't have had to threaten them. But here we are with the steel and aluminum tariffs, and those are really disproportionately. I think Canada is the biggest importer into the U.S., where that we import more aluminum and steel and Canada than anybody else by a pretty big margin, and then it becomes China and Mexico too. So it's interesting that we took it took that threat off the table, but effectively
Right.
it's just putting it right back on.
Well, and I also just keep laughing about this. Like he's being asked, that President Trump's being asked the question about, basically annexing Canada to be the 51st state. And he answers it with a completely serious demeanor. Well, yes, it makes sense. I don't mind subsidizing them for 200 billion if they're a state. So I just wonder how all of this is going to play out. And I saw he signed a proclamation for Gulf of America.
Yeah.
I don't know why I think it's so funny, but I think it's just because it makes people nuts, particularly people in Washington. And that just
Well,
kind of pleases me.
I mean, think about this: if you're Trudeau or you're the Liberal government in Canada, and you're just getting the guys, it's like he's playing whack-a-mole with them. You know,
Right. It's not
you know,
stop.
they finally get a breather. The 25% tariffs, and they didn't have to go. Or they have the posture and tough. But this is the Liberal Party that's in power in Canada. They're about to get shellacked in the end. Elections coming up
Right.
this fall. So I mean, making that party weaker does not hurt the president at all. It actually
Yeah.
helps him a lot. Saying that
Well,
Mexico is not exactly really great friend of ours unless we threaten them. It's kind of weird.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it's, so I went to, New York, as you know, and I did the panel, which is 3 hours on Mornings with Maria, and that was the day that he announced, that the US is going to take over Gaza. Not like, "Wouldn't it be a great idea?" But he just, "And then we'll rebuild it," and I don't know if you watched, but and then we'll get back on track, but Benjamin Netanyahu was just, like, mouth agape, you know, staring at him like, "Hey, we didn't talk about this."
Yeah.
It's just,
But then he
yeah.
probably thought about it and said, "Hey, actually,
Well, he
maybe
kind of did. He
security
kind of
security
did.
standpoint, they're a pretty good idea."
He kind of did, Arthur. He said, "Well, you say things that, astonish other people, and then when they have time to think about it, they come back and say, 'What a great idea.'" So,
Yeah.
mm, to be determined, but, um, anyway, okay, so you're not worried about tariffs as it relates to the stock market, the bond market, the overall economy, at least at this point.
Not at this point. I mean, I really do believe that these are like negotiating tactics. Nancy, to your point, there's countries like the European Union that tax our goods. In some cases, Japan. We talk about how Japan has really high tariffs on certain U.S. goods, especially like a food, like steaks and stuff like that, to protect domestic industries. Europe does the same thing. It can be very punitive. So I think this president would prefer probably to have lower tariffs on goods and services than high. But if countries are going to play unfairly with us, that I think he's like, look at, I'll take the short-term pain to get the right result.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and he's actually said that, so, all right, well then, I have just one more question before we go to break. So Doge, the other part of this equation that's driving people absolutely insane. So we have a mutual friend who used to work at the CFPB and was one of 4 chief of staffs and got paid, I think 5 years ago, 250,000 plus bonus, right? And so I was reading in the journal and, well, you don't have to answer that. I hate when people say right, so I won't say that again. But I was reading that I didn't know this. What this individual told us or told me was that CFPB, which is the Consumer Finance Protection Bureau that was put in place under the Obama administration after the great financial crisis, right, to protect consumers. And I thought they didn't have a budget, and I think effectively they don't have a budget, but they get funded out of the Federal Reserve's profits, and that's the whole nature of the agency. Except the Federal Reserve hasn't had any profits since September of 2022, and in fact, the losses since then are 219, call it 220 billion dollars. Yet the CFPB continues to get funded. So what do you make of that?
Um, that's such a loaded question, Nancy. I think that, like most Americans, I think that government spends way too much money. It taxes way too much. It tries to do things that it's not capable or competent to do. Um, I think the less government does, ultimately, the better results we get. You know, I think that's kind of the mantra that was kind of taught to me at a very young age. It's like, just look at all the things that government does and how we as private citizens interact with government. And the vast majority, very few of them are like really fun, enjoyable, or do we think they actually work well? Like, go to
Right.
the DMV, see how much fun that is. You know, we have to have military and judges and law enforcement. That's a kind of a price we pay for taxes, but at the same time, we probably don't want government doing more things. We want them doing less.
Well, yeah, on my Twitter feed, there was I swiped at the wrong time, but it was, Milton Friedman saying, "Watch where the government spends your money." And then I swiped and I didn't get to hear the end of it. But the best debate I ever saw in my life, and I know you were there, was when your dad debated Milton Friedman in San Francisco. And it was like, well, yes, Arthur, I agree with that. Well, yes, Milton, that's right. You're absolutely right. It was the best non-debate I'd ever seen in
Yeah, and
my
Rose was
life.
there too, and they were the nicest people. And and Nancy, I know you remember this, but you're right. It wasn't really a debate, but it was actually great because it was an intellectual discussion about these things
Yeah.
and how the world really works. Which
Yeah.
you'll remember that book, Jude Wanniski's book, The Way the World Works. I mean, I don't know if
Yes.
it's in print anymore, but if people out there, if you haven't read that book, that's a really seminal work.
Changed my life.
Yeah. I mean, really,
Yeah.
these are great things and great people and great discussions. I think that's probably one of the things we're missing a lot. At least I know you and I talk about how we wish there was a little bit more in-depth discussions on some of these
Discussion.
topics rather than just all this headline garbage.
Yeah. Well, and it was their 60th wedding anniversary. We had dinner the night before. I think you were there. And somebody, Stephen Moore, asked him where they were going to spend their 70th, and he said in heaven. But I mean, they were 60
Yeah.
years married. And so I followed them out. I mean, we all followed out. We were getting our cars, and the guy pulls up, the parking attendant, and in a convertible red BMW for Rose and Milton Friedman. It's like, wait, I'm driving a station wagon. All right. Well, listen, while we're at break, please go to our website, www.laffertengler.com, and we'll be right back. We're going to talk deep state, deep fake, and earnings.
Welcome back, everybody. Now it's Nancy. My turn to quiz Nancy, or really just to actually prompt her for information on earnings season. So we've got first quarter is always a really busy earnings season. And Nancy, I think probably what would be a really interesting thing is your perspective on how you think earnings are going overall. Any themes you see about what's happening with companies, what they're talking about that might be different than prior terms.
Okay. Thank you. Yep. So as I mentioned, I was in New York last week and the week before, and that's when the DeepSeek news broke. And just to recap for everyone, this was dropped by the Chinese over the weekend. So it was the weekend of like January 27th or 28th. And they said that they had built a more efficient AI model for $5.6 million. And so the media was breathlessly repeating this, and the stocks just went, all the AI names got tanked, all the infrastructure names tanked, all of the energy or the electric utility companies that were providing the infrastructure or the data centers with electricity got clobbered. But and I was on CNBC for the entire hour that day. And so what we talked about was that first and foremost, we need to challenge the question as to whether or not they really built it for 5.6 million. And the week before that in Davos, Alexander Wang was interviewed on CNBC, mind you. So everybody knew about DeepSeek. The Meta already had like war rooms set up to try to figure out what they were doing. And what Alexander Wang said was that they had acquired, not purchased necessarily, 50,000 of the powerful NVIDIA chips, which go for about the D1s go for about $40,000 each. So they had 50,000 chips, but they couldn't admit it because they're embargoed. The US was not allowing them to be sold in China. So that was point number one. And then point number two was that the system crashed the next day, DeepSeek. So I think one of the things that we argued and one of the things we did in our portfolios was we added to a number of those names, because usually there's a paradox called Jevons paradox. The cheaper technology becomes, the more it grows. And so we were convinced that A, Silicon Valley knew about this. It was not a surprise. B, the timing was suspect because it followed the announcement with Masa-san, Sam Altman, and Larry Ellison at the White House on Project Stargate, which was $500 million in AI spend. And so anyway, so we think that there's a lot more that will be learned about this. But what we've seen in the earnings releases so far this quarter. So this is for the fourth quarter. 303 companies had reported through Friday. Almost just under 80% of them beat on earnings, and we also saw margins expanding. And the theme behind all of that is companies using AI to improve productivity, improve margins. Even a company like Starbucks, whose same store comps, so that went down. That's not good. Saw margin and earnings expansion due to the use of algorithms on ordering and basically just the algorithm for mobile ordering. So this is so important, because at the margin, if you can tweak faster delivery of coffee or faster delivery of a Chipotle burrito, that's how you really drive earnings to the bottom line. So it was as diverse as companies like JP Morgan, Visa, talking about the improvements and real-time AI payment protection technology, to PLD, which is Prologis. They build, it's a REIT that builds warehouses, and now they're getting into data centers. But they saw improvement thanks to AI. Raytheon, they used it to speed up cycle times at Collins. Software testing cycle times have improved threefold. So there's multiple uses beyond technology. And then the last thing I'll say is that there were 3 companies that reported last week that showed a slowing cloud growth. So Microsoft, which I think actually reported the week before, Google or Alphabet, and Amazon. And all 3 showed that cloud computing demand was slowing, or that the cloud computing growth was slowing, but it wasn't due to demand, it was due to capacity constraints. And so the data center business continues to be super important. The power generation business is not going to slow down anytime soon. And I think utilities and the other energy providers, like the nuclear names, are really decoupling from interest rates and are now being priced based on growth and valuation. So we're early innings. DeepSeek did not derail it, but it showed you how jittery the market was, because the market, and that's the algorithms, the guys that read the headlines, the computers that read the headlines, and then just sell everything. And the hedgies, as we've talked about in the past, have dramatically underperformed the S&P every year for the last decade and longer. So we use it as an opportunity to add to our portfolio holdings.
Nancy, I don't know if you saw, but Macron announced also. So you're seeing this. It's not. The thing is, we tend to be very U.S. centric for a good reason. But Macron and the president of France just announced they're going to do this. I think it's $100 billion investment in AI and chips and stuff like that. Obviously, China is doing it. Everybody's doing it. So it's a global phenomenon. Everybody's trying to create.
Yeah, I did see that. And then did you see that Elon made an offer for OpenAI, which is Sam Altman's? And he's in a big feud with him, so he just put together a consortium for $96 billion or $98 billion to buy OpenAI. I mean, I just can't make this stuff up.
It's very entertaining. I mean, there's no shortage of news or things to watch right now.
Right. Yep, there's the headline. So Sam Altman said no, thank you. But they're not speaking, so I don't know. Yeah, so I think earnings, as we expected, we talked about Lindsay Bell. She was a little more pessimistic than I was, but still expected decent earnings. I think we're going to exceed. Sorry, guys. I think we're going to exceed even some of the more conservative or the more aggressive earnings numbers, and I think that continues. I mean, we are seeing this slowdown in the first quarter because of capacity constraint with some of the hyperscalers, again, Microsoft, Google, and Amazon. But if it's not demand related, then that's comforting. And we heard from NVIDIA that they had staggering Blackwell demand, and they have a 1-year backlog for the Blackwell chips. So this isn't going to end yet, and it's a great ride for investors.
Nancy, I was going to point out from our earlier conversation about trade, things that, again, it's such a target-rich environment with regard to the things that are going on. Um, China's response to the kind of across the board tariffs. I mean, Trump initially threatened Mexico, Canada, and China. He did impose the tariffs on China. They countered with targeted, primarily, I think they went after tech and some other stuff. But what's interesting is that they've been, I think, a little bit less aggressive this time. And I forgot about Marco Rubio because there's so many other things going on.
Right.
He was down in Central and South America cutting deals. We had the Panama Canal issue, but a lot of it was meant to stop the Belt and Road initiatives that China has been making inroads into Central and South America because they're looking for trade because their economy is not doing well. They can ill afford an escalated trade war with us. They just can't afford
Such
it,
a great
especially
point.
if we're going after all their Belt and Road initiatives too.
Such a great point. Yeah, because that is I mean, those are part and parcel together. And it's a targeted, I mean, attack, really well crafted, and it's great. Yeah, thank you for that. That's the last time I'm gonna thank you, though.
I say, you want to talk about getting rid of the penny?
Oh, yeah, let's talk about the penny. You got asked about that today on Fox, didn't you?
I did, and it's funny because like, do you think this is going to have a big impact? And I'm like, well, it's not going to change prices. And I didn't realize how big an impact these digital transactions really are. And it's like, I think the statistics are like 95+% of adults in the U.S. transact digitally in some way, shape, or form. I think it's probably a very high percent. Everybody goes normal transactions is a digital, swiping a credit card, doing Venmo or something else. So you think about a penny really has, from an economic standpoint, probably has almost negligible impact on anything that has to do with price. But the whole point of the 99 cents, 1999, that's a psychological thing. It has nothing to do with whether we use a penny or not. But it's actually probably great. It actually might improve efficiencies because now you don't have, what are you going to do with these pennies? Like, might as well get nickels and dimes too. I mean, really kind of think about quarters. Like, you can't even get bubblegum in a machine for under a quarter.
Right. Well, and you can park with a credit card.
And you can buy a Coke with your credit card now too. You can do everything with
Yeah.
a credit card. Just tap. So
Yeah.
it's interesting that it's kind of going the way of stamps, right? Like, you used to collect stamps, not anymore.
Even I don't use stamps anymore, or
You
checks.
used to keep rolls of them in your drawers. You had stamps everywhere. People
Yes.
collected stamps.
Oh man, well, it's fun times, that's for sure. May you live
Yeah.
in interesting times. Well, thank you. I think we're good unless you had another topic.
No, I think we're going to try to get. Last week we tried to get a guest, Larry Van Horn. We had scheduling problems. We're going to try to get Dr. Van Horn to come back. Larry is one of the foremost experts on medical transparency in the U.S. Helped crafted medical transparency legislation that Trump championed in his first term. So we're going to try to bring Larry back next week. I think he's out this week. So hopefully that'll be our guest next week, and everybody can tune in and enjoy hearing what he thinks about the state of the medical industry.
Yeah, that is so important, and thank you for getting him. It was just really, he was ready to go. We were the ones that had the problem.
That's
But
right.
yeah, so we'll hope that he's with us next week, and we have a number of other guests lined up. And if you have any questions about what we're talking about or writing about, you can go to laffertengler.com, and I think you can look at our commentaries in our every other week research bulletin. So yeah, so great to see you, Arthur. I'm in Scottsdale. Arthur's in Nashville. Poor kid. I think it was 80 degrees here this weekend, or close, 78.
I think we almost got 70 here. And this has been a weird early late. It's still winter, right? It's technically winter. We're not in spring.
It is winter. Yeah, we just got rid of all the Phoenix Open people. My daughter flew out today, and she said it was a 40-minute wait at security at 6:30 this morning. Yeah. So goodbye, everyone. We just have a few more. We've got spring training, and then we get back to normal. So, all right. Well, thank you. We'll see you all next week.